what do I want to do with it? I love it, and it's gotten huge. Great. So I brought a few of my favorites, but these are not necessarily natives. It's very difficult to find natives this time of year. If you're familiar with natives, you know that they're spring to kind of midsummer bloomers. So to me, to really help our pollinators, so we feed them, just like you don't want to open your fridge or your pantry and go, it's empty, or are we going to starve? I mean, we can go to Thriftway and the other markets, but what do our pollinators do? They're waiting for us to make sure that there's a food source continuing throughout the season. So these are all non-natives, but they're hardy, and one of the fun things I enjoy doing is once I put in pollinator plants, studying them and seeing who comes to enjoy the bounty. So this is Abelia, A-B-E-L-I-A. Again, these are all non-natives. This is a pretty sturdy plant, gets 5.5. I have 30-year-old plants that are this tall, and I keep having my landscaper kind of shape them down. So they do benefit from some shaping, so if you're not fond of shaping, you might want to skip this one. And of course, those of us who love our hummingbirds, this is salvia season. My hummingbirds will come every 5 minutes. And I thought, do they just have a bad memory? And they're going to the same blossom? It turns out that plants can regenerate nectar in 5 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes. So I don't have any science data on this, but just judging from what my hummingbirds do, they love it. They're back, they're back, they're back. So this plant, and this plant now is about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years old, and it stays at about this height. So it's nice in your entryways. I have mine right outside my kitchen window. So I'm sitting and drinking tea and looking out, saying good morning to the hummers. And they're there all day. And this plant will be blooming until the frost. So you get a long return from it, midsummer to now. These are my 2 new favorite discoveries, which are asters. This one is quite tall and lacy, so again, not really good right by your entry walkway, but in a back part of your garden, it's fabulous. Mine is about this tall now, and it's just 2 years old. A little bit of rain does pull over some of the stems, so if you can hem it in with something else, it'll stay upright with some of the fall flowers. So part of my criteria at this stage in my life is if I'm going to plant something, I want it to look good during the entire season. I want it to look wonderful as it's coming up. So again, the way the blooms finish off on this, the petals just fall off, and it's a tight little dark bloom head. It's not a big, you don't have to stand in dead head, lots of little individual ones. It will stay, and this has been blooming for 3 weeks already, and you can see how hardy this is. So this is the more delicate aster. This one is my all-time fave. Look at that color. And if you have time during break, I mean, come up and look at how many blooms are getting ready to pop open. When this thing opens, it looks like our spring azaleas that cover the entire plant in color. That's what these guys do. But it's a type of aster, and they only grow this tall. So they're lovely along an entryway. You know, they're not going to block your walkway, and they get very thick. I just, put out the little starter containers, and now I have a 2-foot wide hedge. So this is one of the plants that I'm going to be separating and moving to different parts of my yard, and probably bagging some up for the garden club sale.
Can you trim those? Like when in the spring, kind of badly?
I don't know, I never do that cut back stuff. I'm all about put it in, let it go.
Because I did that to mine, and mine haven't bloomed, I was just curious.
Oh, yeah, see, I don't mess with mine.
And
The
deer
less
leave
work
it-
I do, the better.
And the deer leave it alone.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, that's true. These,
I spray them or they'll eat it.
yeah, people say it depends what part of the island you're on. So this is Autumn Joy Sedum. And I have planted Autumn Joy up at the Seymour Garden. I redid all the plantings up there, and there are pollinator plants and native plants up there. And the comment about deer, they are eating the sedum up there. They're not at my house, so.
I eat mine every year.
So I'm sorry, you might be in a part of the island that these don't work for, but these are covered with pollinators. I really only see honeybees on these. This I see, so that's part of studying your pollinator plants. Who are they welcoming? I see all kinds of native bees, I see sweat bees, I see little tiny wasps. There's a beautiful little butterfly out now, quite a small one, and it loves these. So if you want incredible variety, this is your stellar plant. If you're only going to just look at it. I'm lucky. Yeah, you can come up and do a quick photograph of it on Plant ID if you want.
There's an aster called Douglas aster, and it's about 3 feet high, and I think it's a paler purple. I don't think it's quite that purple, but it is a native.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. Douglas aster. Keep a lookout for that one. So if you have perennials, unfortunately what the handout did is it looked at how to encourage your native gardens and native plantings and things for pollinators over all of the seasons. So I'll just hit the highlights. You want to evaluate your late blooming pollinator plants, decide which ones you want to add more of, and give them a fall feeding so that they're nice and vigorous next spring. And we all know that fall is a great time to plant. It's also the time that our nurseries have sales. So if you have noticed that you have holes or places that you don't have thriving plants, your map can indicate that, and you can get them in, and they can use some of these warm days to get some new roots set out. If you are planting natives, the recommendation is to plant them in a 3-foot or larger block. You don't want one little teeny bloom head sets for your pollinators. You want them to target it visually and come down and find a pretty adequate feeding area. And like I said, mine's about 5 to 8 feet long, and they're just hopping from bloom to bloom. They're having a good time moving around, and nobody's elbowing each other. They each find plenty of blooms to deal with. One of your goals can be to have 3 species of flowering plants in bloom at the same time. So you can see I've kind of pelted. You've got more than 3 represented right here. So you want to think about your early spring blooms. What have you got for your pollinators? What have you got to feed them first thing in the spring? And it may be that you've got fruit trees. You know, we've got a whole variety of things. But just think about your yard and how does it nurture? How does it feed our pollinators through each of our seasons? What do you have that blooms in the summer that really nourishes them then? So maybe that's the hole in your yard. Okay, I need more of that. My yard needed more fall bloomers, and that's what I've gone for. Okay, so some other recommendations for things to do in your fall yard is to leave fallen leaves in place, because our pollinators have got larvae and eggs that are there, and if we do a really tight cleanup, we're throwing them all away. So, you probably don't want that in your entryway blowing around, but can you move your leaves to an area of your yard where they can kind of decompose and be good for the critters over the winter time? And then hopefully, if it turns into leaf mulch, then you have this lovely amendment to add to your garden next spring.
Can you pile the leaves like around the plant, like underneath the road?
Well, sometimes what I do is I crumple the leaves a little bit, pile them around the base of a tree or some plants, and then I put some chips on top of it so that they aren't, and that helps them decompose faster. So that's another suggestion. Your stems, it's a good idea if you can leave at least 6 inches of stubble above the ground. Now again, in our entryways, that's not going to be an exciting thing to do. Do you know the reason for that? You got critters inside the stems that have laid eggs and little larvae. And if we cut all that and send it to green waste, or maybe some of us are still burning, whatever, you're killing the next generation. So that's their overwintering home, is the stubble of our perennials and even our annuals. So again, if you're going to cut them, so one of the things we've done at the pollinator garden is to clear some sections, and we just carried the piles over and leaned them against a fence. So that's another solution. If you feel like you absolutely have to clear that area, then cut. And again, keep them upright. If you lay them down and they get our winter rains on them, you've effectively drowned them. So keep them the way nature has laid them up, somewhere in your yard, and you're doing something to encourage our pollinators. Any native grasses that you have, same thing. If you can just let those dry over the winter and stay in place, there can be a new generation gestating there. And again, we can use our quiet winter months to plan improvements. So some of the other things you can do is, if you haven't yet marked your garden as a wildlife habitat, and this is not the only organization, you know, we work to certify all of Vashon as a wildlife habitat community, and that happened back in 2019, 2020. But there are other people making signs that just say this is a pollinator garden. So think about that, because it engages your neighbors in, what's that all about? Okay, so people that aren't in this room necessarily, but would like to figure out what that's about. And if you're wondering how much does my garden sustain creatures, I've got some of these postcards from National Wildlife Federation, and they basically have 5 criteria areas. And usually when people look at this, they say, oh, I just need to do, and there's one small addition that would make their home, their yard, more friendly. So I have native plants for pollinators, if anybody doesn't have that postcard, and I have more of these if you want to grab them during break. And my comments today come from this book, my new find, The Pollinator Victory Garden, and I'll have that up here if you want to come up and look at it. So I just want to say in closing, I headed up the pollinator garden up at Matsuda Farm, and it was a project that got started in 2019, and it was really the energy of garden club members. Fran was one of the key people. I mean, there was a core group that moved this whole project forward. So the Land Trust gave us a 250-foot row. Just think about your yard. It was kind of daunting. At 3 feet wide, and they said, it's yours. We'll rototill it once for you. We'll put some bone meal on it. You figure out the water, we've got water for you, but you figure out your watering system and plant what you want. And it's been a 5-year process. And with my hip replacement and other issues, and it's gotten pretty weedy. Every year we've just let it reseed itself, and we've put in some perennials. But it's turned into now a pretty high maintenance project, and I had hip replacement this spring, so I couldn't work it this season. So I have gone to the land trust and said we are ending our pollinator garden there. So there may be some other, they're talking about having a children's garden there or some other, so there may be ways that some of those wildflowers get incorporated. But I told Theron Shaw, the new director, that I want to make a PowerPoint presentation that documents our 5-year process and honors the journey that so many of you helped make possible. So I just want to thank everybody who was involved.
Thank you.